This time on Sensing the Signal. On our last episode, Chris and I talked about the Defence Investment Plan and the challenges that small and medium-sized enterprises in particular have in getting into the defence sector in the UK, especially as there's a current push for more innovative technology coming in from the commercial sector into defence. We're going to pick up on that thread a little bit and talk to our guest today about that theme, and in particular about some of the novel and cutting-edge technologies that they're creating. And we have with us on this episode Chris Isaacs, CEO and founder of SpaceAM. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And Chris Toast is with me again.
Hello.
I want to start by talking about space, which is where you guys have started, and it's obviously in your name of the company. Talk to us about space. Talk to us about Venus. Let's start there and go from there.
So 5 years ago now, there was a discovery of a signature biogas marker in the planet's atmosphere of Venus, which was news that was sent all around the world. And I got this phone call saying that there's this discovery, but we're not sure actually, how scientifically correct it's going to be. We're not sure if it really is what we think it is. But biomarkers are signs of life, and we think there may be a marker for phosphine in the cloud layers on Venus. So the news spread quite fast around the world, and there were big press releases about it. And it was actually discovered here in the UK originally by Professor Jane Greaves of Cardiff University. So instantly, there was a mad rush to try and get together ideas for new missions where they would be ultra lightweight, they could be paid for by private individuals or private companies, and basically to get out there as fast as they could to actually see whether or not these signals were real, true signals. And I was in the right place at the right time and had an idea that no one else had thought about. So basically, we were talking with engineers and with scientists from JPL, from NASA, from Rocket Lab, and they were talking about how do you slow a probe in an atmosphere without the use of parachutes or propulsion. And during that process and that whole day, no one really had come up with a very, very good answer to it. There was talks of micro parachutes and sort of trying to use different types of propellers to slow things down. And that weekend I was walking with my son in the woods after the event, and I was just watching sycamore seeds falling from the trees. And I just thought, has anybody ever tried to make some sort of probe system that could be deployed and flies like sycamore seeds? And that was the start of the journey and the very, very beginning of SpaceAM itself 5 years ago.
Wow. And you needed to slow it because it needed to sort of pick up signals from a particular layer in the atmosphere.
Correct. Yeah. So Venus itself is surrounded by 80 kilometres of thick cloud around the whole of the surface. So it's like some impenetrable type of shield. And the Russians had tried in the past to fly balloons very successfully, actually, in the 70s and 80s, through the clouds themselves, but only for short periods of time. And the whole thing about if you're putting something in the clouds is, can you give scientists enough time to do the science that's required for them? And if you're trying to slow things down without parachutes or without propulsion itself, it's like, how can you run the experiments in a timely manner without the thing falling to the ground and then burning up in the lower atmosphere and the pressure that there is on Venus itself, because it's a horrible place. I mean, the clouds are made of 97% sulphuric acid, so it's not a nice place to live in, that's for sure, or to visit or do science in.
Wow. And so talk us through some of your background. How did you get to the point where you suddenly found yourself doing this?
So, I mean, at school, I've always been interested in science and in space. I nearly got expelled from my secondary school, actually, for saying I wanted to be an astronaut. But in England in the 80s...
Seems like a strange thing.
It was just one of those things. So, yeah, but it was never going to happen. So, yeah, in Northamptonshire, it just wasn't a thing that you would then become an astronaut. But I always had that enthusiasm for space, and I basically went through university. I did 2 degrees, one in design, 2D and 3D, and the other one is in advertising. And I got my first job very, very flukily through the advertising side. So I ended up working at Saatchi's for the best part of a year as junior art director. Then found that there weren't that many agencies or communication agencies that actually talked about technology and deep tech. So it was that thing of, how do you talk to engineers and then take the information but turn it into something that other people can understand, then how do you sell that on?
You've just described my day-to-day challenge at a tradies.
That was the starting point of my journey. Then I ended up building my own agency for 20 years, did really well, made plenty of money in that, and then we broke that down and sold that off. Then I had a year out, and then COVID hit, funnily enough. And then at the end of that, I got a call from a good friend at the time, Tom Yates, who was setting up McMurtry Automotive. And he wanted some help with not just the marketing, but actually how do you commercialise what is a startup tech electric hypercar company. So I then went and had 2.5 years of an amazing time flying around the planet, playing with millionaires and billionaires hypercars, which was just incredible, and trying to push forward how do you stick a car to a track and then can drive it at over 200 miles an hour without it flying off. So did that. Made plenty of money in that, and then exited that, and then spent a year. And at that point in time, we were being told by, at that point, the Morningstar mission team that they were thinking about what we call our level probe design in more detail, and they actually felt that it was a good option for a Venus mission, and we should go and try and get some funding. So they kindly wrote letters to the UK Space Agency, and we got some funding from that. But bearing in mind, it was just two guys in the shed at that point. It wasn't a big company, and yet we were there with this letter from the US going, we've chosen you to be part of a space mission of the future, and could you get some UK money together so we can actually exploit this technology that you're building out? Wow. So that's my very, very long-winded journey into how I've ended up here.
That's incredible. So it hasn't gone to Venus just yet. So that's something to come in the future. And the challenge there is going to be, I guess, getting it to where it needs to be and then staying in contact with it and getting the signals back from it.
Most definitely. So, I mean, this is all part of this amazing thing where if you're trying to make a probe that flies like a sycamore seed, it's got to be ultra lightweight because, we spent the best part of a year just looking and studying how sycamore seeds fly.
Wow. And
nature is a beautiful thing. She's a brilliant designer. And when you try and reverse engineer that, in my head originally, I just thought, you just scale up a sycamore seed, it'll work. So doesn't work like that in the slightest. So we've had 3 cohorts of students through Exeter University who have helped us actually develop out the flight system itself. So it's sort of like, how do you put weight on a wing? How much weight can you deploy on a wing? Where's the centre of mass? Where's the centre of rotation? Where is the right point so that you get the right amount of coefficiency on the drag itself, so it's not just plummeting, it's actually auto-rotating. So you've got cone and pitch that allow you to do that, and it's the maths involved in it that actually we now have this model where anybody can come to us and go, okay, we've got a payload of X. How big is the wing? Where do you deploy all of the good stuff to make the science work or to make anything else work? So that's it. And it's
wow. And how unusual is it for a small UK company like yourselves to get involved in something which is ultimately going to be part of a NASA mission?
So it's not a NASA mission as such because these are privately funded missions. So purely because the large space agencies work in a massive timescale, sort of 10 years out before they deploy and do a launch. The team over in the US and actually in Canada now as well, the Morningstar mission team, which are made up of scientists from around the world, they wanted to look at these lightweight missions because at the end of the day, every gram that you're sending off planet Earth into space costs money. So the lighter you can make something and the more efficient you can make it, the better. So with that, we were chosen to work alongside people like Rocket Lab and also MIT and a few other people as well to actually develop out lots of concepts. There was a big white paper that was produced with sort of about 20 or 30 different ideas for what missions could be, and our probe system was one of those within it. So we call our Venus probes level probes. So that's LEVL, and it's leading edge vortex lift, which is exactly what a sycamore seed actually does.
Wow. Yeah.
It's funny when I looked at your website and I saw you've got a couple of videos on the website, and the first thing I thought was, that looks like a sycamore seed. Now, when we met just before coming in here, I was about to ask you that very question. Like, is that design something to do with, is that important in any way? So that's why I had a little chuckle when you said that, because I thought, well, you've basically designed it. It looks exactly as you describe. You mentioned that the atmosphere in Venus is quite challenging. I imagine it's not just the things that you described, but like I don't think silicon and acid get on particularly well together. So how have you got around some of the other issues with things like microchips, etc.?
Oh, my goodness me. So we're doing some work at the minute actually with the European Space Agency that are funding as well. So it wasn't just a case that we'd invented this probe that could go to Venus in the future, but it was all of the technologies that make a very lightweight probe work and fly and then remain for at least 80 minutes of usable time in the atmosphere. So you look at everything from the coatings to how the soldering's put together to actually how the sensors themselves work. And we had to ultra lightweight every single component and get everything so the balance is perfectly right between the mass of the probe itself, how it flies, but also can it produce useful data? Is the resolution good enough on the sensors to actually get useful things back and actually look at the droplets in the clouds and find out how acidic they are? Is there ammonia in the clouds? All this good stuff that the scientists want to know about. So in the process of doing that, even down to the coatings themselves, which was your question, we use a parylene coating, which is a standard chemical coating, but actually to work out how thick it needs to be and whether or not you're putting it in the right places and coating it around all of the circuitry is, again, it's another balancing act in itself. So with the ESA money that we have in now, that's actually one of the projects we're running through Cardiff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it makes me wonder whether more advanced chips, whether they're just too vulnerable because, they're getting smaller and smaller with the nanometers that they're working with. Does that create more problems because you've got less room for things to go wrong or less room for the damage to have a bigger impact, if that makes sense? Are you purposely choosing maybe a slightly more robust but, say, older chip technology or is that not a factor?
It's not really a factor. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not doing the space travel bit. That's done by an entry system and a spacecraft. We actually deploy in the atmosphere. So the only thing we've got to deal with is temperatures from 0 up to 100 degrees in heat. And then obviously it's that acidity within the clouds themselves, the sulphuric acid and the mixture of whatever else is in there. And it's really odd because right at the top of the cloud layer, the sulphuric acid that's in there actually is more like a liquid, whereas you get towards the bottom denser area and it starts getting sludgy to the point of the actual particles that you're looking at they're not round anymore. So at the top they're liquid, so they're nice round little spherical pieces of atmosphere that you're hitting against with the level probes. But as they go lower and lower and lower through the atmosphere, it becomes sludgy and they're not round anymore. And because we haven't actually explored Venus enough, we don't understand enough about the chemistry that's going on in the clouds. And it's that exotic chemistry is part of the reason why private space missions are now happening, because people are getting out there looking at planets, looking at asteroids, looking at the moons and going, what useful stuff is there out there for humanity as a whole? So it's not just a case of will we go and find life, but we might end up with a completely new branch of science because we've discovered a new way of putting chemicals together or chemicals reacting together. So there's a lot of good reasons for going and doing this, and doing it on cheap, lightweight private missions gives universities, countries, the ability to do it without going on this massive cycle through the space agencies themselves. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess the question that brings us back to the world that me and Terry are in is...
You mean Earth?
Yes, our world is how does the things that you've learned in the process of looking at transporting something to literally another planet in very hostile conditions, what does that teach us for deploying sensors on Earth?
An awful lot. So the 5 years of R&D that we've created and all the good stuff, we've got lots and lots of patents that are going through or being produced right now, means that we have a plethora of information about how do you ultra lightweight sensors, how do you take a whole probe system, and our Venus probe systems only weigh 30 grams. That's it.
Wow. Okay.
That's sensors, that's comms, that's processing, everything.
Power.
30 grams. That's the mass each.
You should be designing phones.
Maybe that might come out of some of the stuff that we're doing. Who knows? So Yeah, the amount that we've learned and the technology that we've learned, which is all sovereign and in the UK because we're a UK company, means that we can then move that technology into other areas. And obviously, the hot words now are dual use technology, and we definitely sit in that world of dual use because we didn't start in the defence world, but we've ended up answering problems for the likes of the UK Army and NATO through what we've learned over the last 5 years.
Okay.
And within that, I mean, that sort of connects to what Chris and I were talking about on the previous episode where we were talking about defence investment, etc. And you mentioned the dual use aspect. And, I started off at the beginning saying there's a lot of very sort of cutting edge technology being developed in the commercial sphere that is outside of defence. But yeah, how does that work both from a technology perspective? Have you had to find other ways to integrate or to modify and change or meet certain standards that maybe are not present in the commercial sector? And then also from the, I guess, more of the financial perspective, the investment side of it in terms of what it's meant for production of your hardware and systems.
So going back only over the last 12 months, so back at the beginning of 2025, we were just a space company. And we were at a big international space show, and we were showing one of our level probes. And at that point in time, we were asked by a different country that isn't a very friendly country to the UK to hand over what would be our technical information. And obviously, at that point, alarm bells started ringing. We were thinking, okay, so there are other use applications for what it is that we're doing. And in that time period, the Army got involved, the MOD got involved, and people got very interested in all of the things that we had been doing. But we hadn't actually realised the use cases for here on Earth. We were just concentrating on nothing but get the probes finished, get this ultra lightweight finished, get the comm system done, get all the sensors done, all the good stuff, and not looking at the wider world and the wider aspect, which is sort of the commercialisation, I suppose, of the whole company. So that's why the company starts and the name is SpaceAM, autonomous machines. But in actual fact, we've sort of moved into this other world and been asked politely to move into this other world. So now we have a portfolio that we've been working on since the beginning of last year of everything from comms to sensors that can be used in the defence sector. And with the funding, back at the beginning of 2025, we weren't a defence company and we didn't actually have a defence product at that point in time. But because we were highlighted and people were asking us or pointing out that we had solved problems that the Army and the MOD had, we then went, still two people working very, very hard. And, Nick and I spent a lot of sleepless nights and hours and weekends because we still had sort of day jobs as well going on at the same time, actually developing our first defence product.
Yeah.
And off the back of the space thing. So November last year, the 25th of November, which gets burned into my brain. The night before, if the MOD would have saw us, they'd have gone, what are we doing? We were there still with soldering irons and computers out going, will what we've done actually work? We demoed, and even the process of getting a demo together for the Army wasn't easy. We'd had this thing at the start of the year where people were saying this is a really interesting piece of technology, but we didn't manage to get any funding from the mod at that point in time in 2025. We were told to go for DASA funding. We got DASA fundable status because there wasn't enough money in the pot. So it was like earmarked. If the government actually find any more money behind the sofa, then great. We can help you out. We looked at venture capital as well, and at that point, because we were such a low TRL at the beginning, nobody wanted to invest in us. So we had to prove out the technology, and I think I did about 14 different defence events and shows, and then every so often I kept on bumping into Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Keegan from Battle Lab, and he'd go, "This is a brilliant idea. You're still here, Chris, and you've still got no money. How can that be? This isn't right. We want this. What's going on?" And it happened 3 times over the course of the year. And then the last time he actually said, "Look, this is just crazy. I'm going to make sure you get a demo." And if it wasn't for Battle Lab and for Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Keegan, we wouldn't have got in through the door. Because he could see the benefit of what we were doing and actually saw it as what would then become a future capability. So November last year, we took what was TRL 0 at the start of the year, By end of November, we were at TRL6. We took it to Lulworth, demoed it. Everybody was speechless because two guys had just appeared with this whole new sensor comms array that was air deployable, and basically blew everybody away.
Wow.
And that was the start of the journey. Then from there, we had a weird period over the Christmas just gone where we were thinking, okay, so we've been told that this is good, but we still haven't got any funding for it. And then MOD came good and actually gave us our first neutral vendor framework through Commercial X March this year, which was a small amount of money, but it got us up and running and got us developing out from TRL6 to where we needed to be to actually get it into pre-production process and get the next generation of it, because it was a working prototype concept demo that we'd done. And then basically, luckily for us, and the timings were absolutely right, John Healey, the ex-Defence Secretary, was on the look for technology companies that had dual-use applications. It was quite an easy process. He asked Commercial X, are there any companies out there that you would recommend? Because we were on a neutral vendor framework already, we were trusted, so we were put through, had a couple of rounds of interviews, filled in lots of questions about, what are the other commercial aspects of the company? Could you actually grow a business, labs, factory? Could you employ lots more people in the future? And within the space of about 3 weeks of filling in the forms, we got the answer back, which was, yes, you're one of the 13 companies. You are picked as a defence unicorn, which was, it's incredible. But at the same time gives you a whole load of other issues to then start working on. But what it did do was that they actually deployed money incredibly quickly into our account,
wow.
which
that's unheard of.
Yeah, I know. For the mods, it's one of those things that, I keep on going to shows and events where you've got lots of SMEs going, when is there ever going to be money in the defence world, from the UK government? But they are actually investing, but they're investing in what they need and what actually is future capabilities. So they're not investing in everything, but the ones that they are picking, they are pushing at speed.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that's the first time, I think I'm right in saying that's the first time that MOD's done that. And, you've mentioned there are a few different frameworks, and for people who are maybe listening who are outside the UK, these are all parts of the kind of system through which companies get funded. And Chris Toast and I have talked in the past on episodes about how defence investment happens and how companies get selected, etc. But essentially, there's different mechanisms there. You started off with DASA, Defence and Security Accelerator, as it was. I think it's now UK Defence Innovation. That was always designed to kind of give some sort of start money for companies to get ideas off the ground, but it never really ever seemed to connect to sort of further programs of record. And as you pointed out, it was a relatively small pot anyway. And Chris Toast and I talked on the last episode about how that innovation money needs to be expanded. There is a certain amount allocated in the Defence Investment Plan. We'll wait and see how that gets spent. But it's really encouraging that the Defence Secretary, as he was then when he made that announcement of the 13 UK defence unicorns, that money flowed through so quickly, that it was actually spent straight away, because that's always been part of that challenge, has been that there's a lot of kind of good ideas get funded, but then they don't necessarily always lead to things. But like you said, if there's something there that actually there's an immediate application for, perhaps the money can be unlocked more quickly. So it's encouraging, I think, in a way, and it's good to hear that's been part of the success that you're having. And now you've got different problems.
Oh, lots. Yeah. Where do I start? Because you go from two-man band to scale up at speed, and really needs to be at speed. So you've got money in the bank, which is great. But in the UK as a whole, we are not set up for scaling at speed, any companies. And that is part of the problem of the UK right now and the ecosystem for SMEs and for businesses as a whole. We're a small island. So supply problems, logistical problems of actually getting stuff in. So it was even down to, okay, so we need at least a workforce of 9 or 10 people spun up straight away. Most people have got a 3-month break window in their working employment contracts. So you end up having to go down the route of employing recruiters or headhunters to try and find people and get a breadth and depth of people that you can then choose from, which is painful, but you have to do that to get the bums on the seats and get people in there that are good.
Presumably you're also looking for people with very specialised skills.
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
got to be UK nationals.
Yep.
I'm imagining they need clearances or need to be able to apply for clearances.
Even our office admin has security clearance. We push everybody through security clearance.
Which is a fast, easy process.
Oh, my goodness me. It's everything. I mean, it's even down to really simple things like we do a lot of work with AI. And we're building our own AI models and doing our own machine learning all in-house. To do that, you need hardware to do it on. So we were using Apple Mac Ultra Studio machines, which they're about £5,500 a machine. So they're not cheap, and you stack them up. Went to Apple, and there's 2 left in the whole of the UK when we were starting, and that was it. And that's Apple.
Wow.
And it's the same with every piece of hardware. Everything we were doing, microscopes for test benching, anything where we were looking, even down to tables and chairs. It's really difficult to actually get a company going very, very quickly in the UK. So basically, we spent 8 weeks absolutely working night and day to get everything we needed, the people, the supplies, everything to do our bench testing, building out 3 electronics engineering workstations. It's not in the UK right now, and you have to wait for things to arrive, and and then you've got all the legal processes as well. So, it's really difficult scaling at speed in the UK. It really is, and that's before you start doing the manufacturing stuff. So we go from our TRL 6 defence product, and then we want to push that on. So we want to go into pre-manufacturing. So we are actually developing out our own PCB boards from scratch because everything has to be ultra lightweight. So we need to control every single aspect of everything that's going on those boards. So we're drawing up 8-layer PCB boards with AI chips on. Great. Take it to UK manufacturers of PCB boards. No one can make them in the time frames that we require at all. Or they don't have the tolerances to make them in the UK at all.
To the level that you need them.
Exactly.
Wow.
So we've because we're pushing so hard and so fast, it's starting to highlight capability issues around manufacturing in the UK as a whole. So if all of a sudden the Far East is turned off tomorrow, how do you put AI chips on PCB boards? That's a really big problem because everybody wants AI out in the field deployed right on the edge, and you need companies that can actually manufacture this stuff. So it's highlighted to us, and we are actually now looking at starting to buy our own manufacturing equipment because it doesn't exist in the UK right now.
Wow.
We've talked about this on 2 episodes now. We talked about it originally with Katerina Bondar, where we talked about, I asked the question, should we have something similar to like a Shenzhen, where we can have this very quick and aggressive turnaround of ideas supported by local manufacturing.
Clusters. We've got clusters, yeah. And this was all about learning lessons from Ukraine.
Yeah, and that seemed to be very strongly supported. But to hear it directly from somebody that's just literally going through this process right now and describing this isn't something that we need to do for the future, this is something that is holding us back right now, I think that's a really interesting take on that. I think what was also really interesting is the way you talked about you were basically 2 guys in a shed and taking it from TRL 0 through to, moving through to proof of concept. Last time me and Terry spoke, in my view, people that are good at getting a proof of concept off the ground, like the initial concepts, the creativity, are not necessarily the same people that have got a lot of experience in scaled manufacturing. And I wonder whether they're almost 2 separate businesses, and because you've had to do it yourself all the way through, do you think that's the way to do it, or would you actually see a more efficient process for other people starting out where they can almost hand over like a TRL 6 to somebody else to then scale it?
I mean, there are companies in the UK that do research and development design work for products that can move it through the TRL levels, but you've still got the same problem of where are you actually going to manufacture this product, or even manufacture a short run so you can do a large demo.
Yeah.
And the answer is nearly 9 times out of 10, we send it to Asia, we send it to China or to Taiwan. And it's just, at some point, we have to start investing back into the manufacturing in the UK. So for us...
Surely massive IP concerns with doing that.
Most definitely, yeah. I mean,
we've mentioned supply chain risk and all kinds of issues,
Exactly. Yeah. So everything that we've got on our boards and everything that's going through our... lines at the moment, and we use 3 manufacturers in the UK to do assembly and do design work, and then we have an extra company that's out in Europe that is actually doing the bare PCB boards themselves for these AI chips. And the only reason they're out there, still in Europe and still within the NATO alliance, is purely because we can't get the tolerances in the UK on anything. So we had to wait longer to get our first set of boards back. But yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be more problems as we go through to final manufacturing as to all the different bits and pieces that go to make these things up. But we're very lucky. We've managed to broker a deal with an AI chip partner who's actually German and Polish to put their chips on boards, and we now have a stream with them looking at their new chips. So we're getting ahead of the curve, in effect, of what is possible in, again, ultralight weighting, very, very small, very power efficient, very small chips, the size of not more than a grain of rice or half a postage stamp, in effect, in old money, right on the edge of the battlefield itself.
So thinking back to when you were a commercial space focused company before you made that transition into defence, was the plan always to be a UK specific company and drive manufacturing in the UK and have everything designed and built here essentially? Or has that come about because of that shift into defence and the need to think about supply chain risk and all those things we just touched on? And it comes on to, I guess, that one of the big drives at the moment, which is around building sovereign capability, and the UK, amongst every other country right now, is trying to do that. And so was that something that was maybe part of the things that were impressed upon you by defence, that if you're going to be successful in this sector, that's really what you've got to do? Or was that always something you'd intended?
So going back to having this 5 years worth of R&D in our back pocket and all of this great technology that we'd been working on, what we needed to do is look at how you commercialise it. I mean, we always knew we wanted to create a technology-based company in the UK. That was a given. So we wanted to do something that would be long-lasting, that would have lots of people and basically create jobs and growth and everything else. But with the space stuff, I knew, hand on my heart, that it would be very hard to sell it to anybody else, because how many people want to probe to measure acid in an acid cloud? There's not that many. But actually looking at the technologies that we were creating along the way, we knew that we could break them apart and spin them out, but we didn't think about it from the defence viewpoint at all. So we always had an eye on using some of the sensors that we were creating to actually go into medical devices, and some of the deployment mechanisms that we were looking at and the comms things we were looking at. Could they be used if a mobile phone network went down, or if there was a disaster? Could we do something with our tech in that space as well? So there's a lot of things that we floated with VCs, funnily enough, over the last year in a product roadmap of this is where SpaceAM could be in the future. But the one thing that basically overtook all of that was the fact that the Army had saw that we could do useful stuff with our tech.
And no doubt that, I suppose, that intention that you had at the start of building a UK manufacturing capability aligns well with the need to have sovereign capability in the UK. Yeah, I'm sure it makes it more attractive. Yeah,
most definitely. I mean, it's that thing of it's not just us as well. So yes, we are prototyping, but we use a company down in Falmouth, Electronics, who are a really good assembly company. So they're assembling some of our stuff. We use a couple of other PCB design companies in Gloucestershire. It actually, the money spreads. We're keeping everything in the UK and working together. I mean, obviously, with everything we do, we need to make sure that the security is right and that we operate at the right levels, which is obviously, it's another one of those things that when you're trying to scale up at speed, it's sort of, here's the government money, right, we need you at ISO 2701, you've got 6 weeks, go. And they say, well, hang on a minute, no, that's not doable. So it's like 6 months. Yeah, okay, we can probably do it in 6 months, maybe. So, and it's that type of thing. And it's, you just, you push as hard as you can.
There's a parallel with what you're saying about, sending things to space, and, that's not really applicable to most people on Earth. I think we see the same in Formula One when we
did an episode previously with a company called Purple Sector who developed sensors as well off the back of Formula One know-how.
Yeah, exactly.
Really interesting.
So whether it's elite sport, whether it's space exploration, it seems that it doesn't really matter what the impetus, it doesn't really matter what it is that you're doing. If it's extremely difficult, there are things that are created off the back of that challenge that then are applicable in all these different other areas. So it seems like we need to keep that in mind, not to be so short-sighted on what's the utility of flying to Venus. No, you're missing the point. By learning how we get there and achieving our mission there will be things along the way that we then apply into our daily society. And it sounds like all of the technology that you're creating have so many uses that we don't necessarily have the imagination to think of beforehand. But when we're being questioned, is this something that we should put our money to? I think that should be the point at the back of our mind, is that is nearly always the case. If you take on an extremely difficult endeavour, the output is likely better things for all of us, whether it's on Earth or off the F1 track or wherever else.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree with every single thing you said there. It's that thing of building sovereign capability sounds good, but at the end of the day, if you can do something for your country where you are enriching everyone's lives and protecting it at the same time and creating future investment, then that's, you can't beat that, to be quite honest.
Yeah, sounds good. Can I bring it back right to the beginning of the conversation? You talked about you actually started out in more of an art field. You were involved in advertising. You had an art degree, I think you said. I'm really interested in this. Advertising degree.
Art.
Well, it's funny that you scoff at that, because my point was that I find it interesting that there is potentially this connection between what are seen as like engineering, hard sciences, like the STEMs, and yet the creativity and what could be brought to that, or how art or creativity could enhance that. I think it's a really interesting mix that you've had these two, this advertising world and this sort of engineering world. And if you could maybe describe a little bit about how you think that's positioned you in this to be one of the defence unicorns.
I think for me, on a personal level, I just see connections. I see use cases for everything around me constantly, and I always look at and question, how can I use that? How can I make it better? How can it be different? But the nice thing is that I then have the ability to actually then sell that to people. Unlike a lot of other engineers, which is it's that like superpower of going, okay, so this is what engineers saying, this is what the people need to hear. Now you've got to try and bridge that gap. So and that's something that in my career to this point, in all the different companies I've worked at, is I wouldn't say superpower, but it's something that has really stood me in good stead with every challenge that we've had. But our challenges are changing all the time, and I'm really lucky that over the last year I've built a really good team around me, and that's part of the not so much the defence unicorn, because some of these people came on before we got the cash in. They just believed in what I was doing. Our first angel investor we had in through to Andy Cullen, who is our CFO at SpaceAM. So Andy actually started up Cullen Lens, which was one of the first defence drone companies. He sold it to BAE and exited about 2.5 years ago. So to have him on our board and have him as my CFO means he's walked the scorched earth. He knows how defence contracts work. He knows how VCs work. He knows how to push and when to actually take a break from what you're doing. So people like that, it's just, they're invaluable to have them on your team. So building a good team around you is definitely one of the things also that I've learned in the last sort of 35 years, I think.
Is there anything from a management or leadership perspective that you've had to learn quickly to go from, say, somebody that's exploring and innovating through to suddenly managing, a team of people in this very quickly accelerated space?
It's a mixture of the hiring process and the order in which you hire people in. I've got to admit that I didn't factor in the first sort of 9 people that we hired that we would be hiring a full-time security and IT manager, because we're all technically minded, so it just comes as a matter of course. And I thought that we would be outsourcing that to begin with as we sort of ramped up, but it became quite clear to me very quickly that no, we actually need a security manager on site constantly 24/7 monitoring everything. So that's definitely a life lesson that I didn't see coming, that's for sure. I think that's about it. I can't think of anything else, actually.
No, it's really interesting. I think people do overlook both information security and also information management, because when things escalate, those are the things that can unravel really fast, aren't they? But seem like really boring at the time and don't seem at all operational, but really slow you down once you start.
And when you're manufacturing, I guess physical security as well. You've got to protect your premises and all the rest of it. There's a lot of IP to protect in many ways. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, that's Talk about scaling at speed. One of the other things that we had to buy, one of our first buys, was actually a new external fire door. So you've got to take out the old fire door and you've got to replace it with a totally steel door that basically will last longer than the building will that we're renting, and that cost an awful lot of money. I now know how much fire doors cost.
So that I guess that comes on to your question earlier about like defence standards. I know other people that are producing drones and USVs, etc., that they're always fighting this. Do we really need to meet defence standards on the wiring because it's going to make it a lot more expensive, heavier, take a lot longer to build? It seems like some parts of defence are pretty pragmatic about it. Depends how long the thing's got to last. Other people seem quite strict. Are there ways that you think you would recommend to defence or government that they could sort of get out their own way with stuff like that? Or do you think it's fairly well balanced?
I would say I think it's fairly well balanced. With drone technology is one of these things that drones have been made for a long period of time now. We understand how drones work, and there's a lot of off-the-shelf components that you can buy, get them into the UK and say you're a drone manufacturer. I hate to say it, but it's not that difficult to build a drone nowadays. And you get kids doing it as hobby projects. If you're trying to develop circuit boards from scratch, that's a completely different thing. So rather than buying off-the-shelf components, if you're trying to build a soldering capability, that word, those two words, actually mean that you understand how the circuits go together, how the boards go together, not just is the wiring up to the right standard. Doing that as a small SME is very tricky because it's very labour intensive and it costs a lot of money. And watch this space, really.
Well, you mentioned AI earlier and that you're developing your own, and I find that really encouraging because I think a lot of the messaging that we're getting from the CEOs of these big companies and which their salespeople as well, predominantly, is that frontier big models is basically a necessity, and there seems to be almost more of a niche group of fairly respectable thinkers in AI that are saying no, the future is probably more single node language models rather than long language models. You're actually building it for yourself, so you're an authority on this. Do you see a future, certainly more than me, do you see a future where we genuinely can, like the UK can really carve out a space for itself and have its own independent, properly sovereign AI that is serving large portions of the population rather than just all of us relying on these huge LLMs?
I think the genie's already out the bottle with that one. I think a sovereign large model is something that we could spend a lot of time doing rather than actually using other people's models that are already in NATO as it stands. The trick is what you do with it and how you deploy it and how you try and scale down that model so it will actually fit on a very small chip and have very low power and work and do more than what you would expect it to do. And how you go from a very large model and how you train off one model down to smaller models is something that we've become very, very skilled at very, very quickly.
When you say we, do you mean you personally or the UK?
No, I mean SpaceAM. So right. we have two people at the minute that just purely do nothing but AI in the business. And it's that thing of, how do you, as you said, how do you take large models and how do you scale it down and down and down and yet still make it proficient and work and be able to do what it needs to do with the sensors and the comms and everything else, but keep it so ultra small. And that's one of the skills and one of the secret sources that we've managed to achieve. So we've got a lot of new patents coming out around what we've managed to do with that.
I'll be watching that space. I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. It all sounds fascinating what you're working on currently. What's next and where does this go for SpaceAM? So
we literally are today in London and I'm signing on the dotted line with a large London VC to buy some percentage of SpaceAM itself, and that's only come about because of the defence unicorn money that we've had in. So basically, before we had that money in, and we had a product that people were interested in, it was very difficult to get any VCs interested in what we were doing. Whereas now, because the money's in the bank already and we're being backed by UK PLC, we've now unlocked private equity and private money into the business, and we wouldn't be able to do that without it. So that's the first thing. So that's actually today. But then moving forward as a company, we'll be looking at going for a Series A and a Series B, producing our own manufacturing facilities and growing out the business. So we've got a large tech UK business that could be what would be classed as a neo-prime of the future, and maybe take on some of the bigger boys.
Nice. I would say the sky's the limit, but it's not, is it?
It's like when you said making drones is easy. It is if you're sending things into Venus. Yes, I guess making drones is easy for you. For the rest of us, we still think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. This has been fascinating. I think we're almost at time. So, Chris, Isaac, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about the work that you're doing. There's so much there to go through and to learn from, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people interested in listening to this. Amazing work. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
That was amazing, because Chris Isaac there talked through so many of the things that we have talked about on several of these episodes and in the conversations we've had outside of the podcast around technology, defence technology in particular, where it's at right now and how the UK progresses. But, we're using the UK essentially as an example of what other countries in NATO should be thinking about, because we've talked about lessons from Ukraine, etc. But taking this kind of unique cutting-edge technology from the commercial sector, bringing it into defence, making use of it, applying it to immediate problems, and hearing from a company that's at that stage where they are getting that initial nebulous kind of funding that starts them off to then scaling up. That was fascinating as well, because we talked about this in the round, and we talked about it in general, how defence needs to build these capabilities and drive UK growth through manufacturing. That's all part of the plan and the strategy. It's amazing to see it actually happening. I
think a lot of the other clever people that we've spoken to in previous episodes have alluded to this and said this is an issue, and this is where we can really help innovators drive forward and help the UK. What Chris Isaac has done is just prove that. It's just said, look, this is real and I'm going through it right now. And I think that's an opportunity for whether it's government, whether it's people like us, speaking to more people like Chris and finding out what are the problems, what's working well. I think there just needs to be a lot of communication with companies like this, because they're clearly doing some really exciting work. They're really pushing the edges of what we know is possible. And defence will really benefit from having this. The UK government will benefit from applying this into other sectors like healthcare, etc. So I think the idea of listening to these companies and getting this feedback, so that sometimes we probably make wrong assessments. We can hold our hands up when that happens. As it stands right now, they're saying that they're bringing up a lot of the concerns and a lot of the opportunities that other people have pointed out. And I think, we should do more listening to people like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Sensing the Signal is brought to you by Atreides, the behavioural analytics company. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find out more about what we do at atreides.io.